If you look at a global map of the world, one of the first things you will notice is the enormous size of Russia. The country is nearly the same size as the continent of South America, stretching from the Baltic Sea to the east and touching the Pacific Ocean. In fact, Russia borders Norway and North Korea on either side to give you an idea of its size. But located much more to the west is a small stretch of land we know today as Kaliningrad, a stretch of land that is more than 370 kilometers from Russia as the crow flies and surrounded by EU countries. With more than 1 million native Russians living here, you might be wondering how it came about that Kaliningrad is so far removed from the motherland. Join us today as we dive into this unique and fascinating state and try to uncover how this part, which was formerly known as Königsberg and served as the capital of Prussia, became part of what is today the biggest country on the map. After being founded by the Teutonic Knights in the 13th century, the formerly known state of Königsberg was largely German for almost 684 years. In fact, it served as the capital city of Prussia for centuries until 1701, when the capital was eventually transferred more westward to Berlin. However, the Russians still didn't have any influence, and Königsberg remained the easternmost region of Germany for 2.5 more centuries. Yes, the Russians did briefly annex Königsberg during an invasion in 1758, but this was short-lived, and they gave it back to Prussia in 1762, which led to Königsberg remaining part of Germany for the next 183 years. But as World War II broke out, the region became a great launching pad for the Germans to get close to the Baltic states. However, in August of 1944, the Germans were already in full retreat, with the Soviets reaching these eastern frontiers of what was formerly known as Prussia. You see, the Germans had a population of more than 2.6 million inhabitants in Königsberg at the time, but as the Soviet onslaught continued, the Nazi German government was planning a massive evacuation to the west in an attempt to escape the rapid Soviet advances. Unfortunately, the Germans could not evacuate people fast enough, and more than 2 million of those inhabitants had to flee out of panic. You see, the Soviets were pummeling the city with artillery, with the British bombing campaigns assisting in bringing the beautiful city of Königsberg down to rubble. By April 1945, the Soviet Union had fully occupied the city, and with World War II coming to an end, the Soviets began occupying the city pending a territorial settlement. As the Second World War drew to a close, the allies of the war, the United Kingdom, United States, and Soviet Union, had to meet to determine the official borders and what would happen with German territory. Under the Potsdam Agreement on August 1, 1945, it was determined that Russia would hold on to Königsberg, pending the final determination of territorial borders at an anticipated peace settlement. However, the Russians had to wait nearly 5 decades before they would know that Kaliningrad would officially become part of the Soviet Union. In fact, the Soviets had already named the city Kaliningrad just a year after the annexation, after the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, Mikhail Kalinin. The day was September 12, 1990, when the treaty on the final settlement with respect to Germany was signed, TO+4 agreement. It was during this settlement that the President of the United States and the British Prime Minister would support the proposal for Kaliningrad submitted by the Soviet Union. By the end of the meeting, Kaliningrad would be fully integrated into the Soviet Union. What many might not know is that the Soviets were already changing the cultures in Kaliningrad in an attempt to strengthen their hold on the region. In fact, the remaining German population after World War II was forcibly expelled between 1947 and 1948, while Russian became the new official language. The Soviets even built a monument to Stalin, which stood on Victory Square from 1953 to 1962, and the town hall officially became the House of Soviets. Even though the city was mostly rubble, the rebuilding started, and to combat hunger, the region relied heavily on oceanic fishing, eventually setting up one of the main fishing harbors of the USSR. During the early parts of the annexation, the region was completely closed off to foreigners. However, many believe that the reason the Soviets held on to Kaliningrad was the strategic benefits it offered the Soviets and the modern-day Russian Federation. You see, Kaliningrad might not seem like it has any strategic benefit. It is completely surrounded by Poland and Lithuania, both NATO countries, but it is only a mere 65 kilometers from Belarus, a prominent Russian ally. Since the end of the Cold War, Russia has remilitarized the area, and today, Kaliningrad is home to Russia's Baltic Fleet at the port of Baltisk, which means it is Russia's only ice-free port. In recent years, Russia has also deployed its short-range Iskander ballistic missiles, capable of carrying nuclear warheads, and before the invasion of Ukraine, Russia added more military firepower to the region. You see, Kaliningrad provides Russia with direct access into the heart of NATO, and being stationed along the Baltic Sea means that it could become handy in a time of war in blocking out trade to Baltic nations. The 65-kilometre stretch of mostly countryside separating the region from Belarus can also easily be taken in an attempt to isolate the Baltic countries from the EU up north, but inside Kaliningrad, an economic crisis is brewing. Whilst the region was transformed into a special economic zone in 1996, with numerous tax incentives and other advantages for investors, the 2008 economic crisis hit the oblast hard. By the end of the year, unemployment soared to 80%, and by 2014, Western sanctions in response to the Russian annexation of Crimea pushed the region into further turmoil and dismantled the special economic zone privileges. However, further Western sanctions following the invasion of Ukraine have led the region to essentially hit rock bottom as of 2022, and being surrounded by numerous EU nations restricting border trade has made its isolation even worse. However, there are still a few controversies and opinions doing their rounds throughout Russia and Germany when it comes to the old region, formerly known as Königsberg. If you ask any Russian, they would tell you how the oblast has formed an integral part of the Russian Federation. However, many Germans have also migrated back to the city since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, with the Germans raising requirements for people from the former Soviet Union to be accepted as ethnic Germans and have a right of return. Many Volga Germans from other parts of Russia, like Kazakhstan, found themselves back in the region. In fact, some of the cultural heritage, like the Königsberg Cathedral, was even restored in the 1990s. But the Germans are not the only ones to have returned to the region. Many Poles from former Soviet lands also found themselves in the area, and before the Crimea annexation, Germany, Lithuania and Poland renewed contracts with Kaliningrad Oblast through twin towning and other projects. However, the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 saw Lithuania start implementing EU sanctions, which blocked about 50% of all the goods being imported to the region. Only food, medicine and passenger travel were exempted, which has led the region into a downward spiral that will be hard to come back from. But what does the future hold for Kaliningrad? With the war ongoing in Ukraine and almost 80% of Kaliningrad made up of native Russians, it doesn't seem too positive for the region. Russia has recently touted the idea of nuclear missiles, which is a response to NATO air defense systems, but with the West announcing new each year, it doesn't seem like the region would survive without intervention from the Russian government. Between February 16th and 28th, an online referendum on the self-governance of the Russian Federation's republics found that 72.1% of respondees in the Kaliningrad Oblast want to break free from the Russian Federation. But with such a massive strategic advantage and the constant threat of war between Russia and NATO, it doesn't seem likely that independence for Kaliningrad would come peacefully. However, should such a break happen and Kaliningrad can choose its independence, will it become a sovereign state or simply fall under the leadership of Germany or perhaps Poland? Let us know in the comments section, and make sure you subscribe to our channel to find out more about how Germany lost so much territory to foreign powers.